Well, it's cold today in northern New York, so I thought I'd warm up by telling you a story. This one is called Lallah Pombo. It's a gypsy tale. In the beginning of all things, the Creator stood at the top of a high mountain. In his hands were some rice seeds. He cast the seeds upon the wind. The wind picked up the seeds and dropped them in the fertile soil. The rains came, and everything grew. The rice was lush, and now the land which had once grown nothing was prosperous. A rice land grew up, and there was a kingdom. In the kingdom was a kind and just king who ruled over all with fairness and kindness. Working for the king was a great magician who at first did great feats of magic, but after a while, seeing how the king was getting so rich and everyone around him prospered, the magician's heart turned evil and he began to do black magic. Once the king found this out, he banished the magician from the kingdom. In anger, the magician climbed to the top of the mountain and cast curses upon Riceland. And then he mounted a beautiful bird and flew off to the moon. The people ran around Riceland picking up all of the curses and putting them back into the bag. They got all of them, except one, and it was the worst one of all: drought. In no time at all, the rain stopped. There was no moistness in the air, and the plants began to wither. The animals began to die. The people were thirsty and hungry. Living in the corner of the rice land was a young girl named Lallah Pombo, and she lived in a family of gypsies who told stories and sang songs and danced and read people's fortunes and tea leaves. But Lallah Pombo could do none of those things. "It would appear that I am of no use at all," she said to her mother one day, and although her mother did not nod, she thought so too. One day Lallah Pombo was looking out upon the barren field. She turned to her mother and said, "What could I do to help the people of the rice land?" "The only thing that you could do, Lallah, is to find where rice lives." "Well, where does rice live, Mother?" "Well, how should I know?" That night, Lallah Pombo could not sleep. And in the morning, just before the sun rose, Lallah Pombo made a decision. She was going to find where rain lived. She went out the front door and stood at the moon gate looking out upon the barren field. And then she walked through the moon gate, and without a map and no direction, Lallah Pombo went looking for where rain lives. And she walked 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 and she walked. She walked until she came to a marketplace. There were many people around, many merchants, and these merchants had traveled all throughout the world. "I will sit here. I am sure they will tell me where rain lives," thought Lallah Pombo. And she listened to great tales of the stars in the Caribbean. She heard stories of the waves at sea and the oceans and the animals and the fish and the huge creatures that lived under the water. She heard stories of birds. She heard stories of spices and clothing and people who looked very different than she did. But she did not hear where rain lived. So she walked and 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 she walked. She walked until she came to a town square, and there were temples and synagogues and churches there. Many great people were sitting outside with their great books, and they were reading, And Lallah Pombo sat down. Ah, they must know where rain is, she thought. And she heard them talk about great things, about morals and ethics, and what God decreed and what God refused. But they did not know where rain lived. So she walked and 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 she walked. As she walked, she fell in with a group of travelers, and they were going to start their own country. And they were talking about the rules and the laws that they would have in their own country, and who would be allowed to live in their country, and what language they had to speak, and how they had to vote, and who was going to be allowed in, and who was going to be kept out. And they were just going to have to build a huge fence, and those people would not be allowed in. And Lallah Pombo realized very, very quickly that these people had no idea where rain lived. So she walked and she walked and she walked and she walked. And she walked and she walked and she walked and she walked. She walked. She was so tired. She walked through a forest. Her feet made no sound, but she heard the sounds of birds. She saw insects. She saw animals, and all these things were marvelous to Lallah Pombo. She walked all the way through the forest, and when she was on the other side, she was so exhausted, she just fell to the ground. And when she awoke, she felt the mist on her face. She heard the wind speaking to her. I am where rain lives. And suddenly, standing right before her was the Creator. She stood up and said, Creator, please come back to the rice land. Please sow the rice again. Bring the rain so that all that was once prosperous is prosperous again. Please, we are hungry. We are thirsty, and our animals, they are dying. Please come and help us. And the Creator said, no. Those were the olden times. And I sowed the first rice. These are the new times, Lallah Pombo. It is up to you to do it. And he gave her a handful of rice seeds. She looked at the rice, and she said to the Creator, I can't do that. I am no one. I'm nothing. I am no one. The Creator said, you are not no one, Lallah Pombo. You are the bridge between the old and the new. When you go back, sow the seeds, and the rain will come. All that was prosperous will be prosperous again. And after that, Lallah Pombo, I want you to travel throughout the world and tell your stories, the stories that you've heard, the stories that you will hear. You are not no one, Lallah Pombo. You are a storyteller. And storytellers are true nobility. And she walked and she walked and she walked and she walked. And she walked and she walked and she walked and she walked. And she walked all the way back to the rice land. She sowed the seeds and the rain came. And the land that was once prosperous was prosperous again. And as for Lallah Pombo, she did travel the rest of her days throughout the world, telling stories and singing songs, and reminding people that storytellers are true nobility.